I'm going to introduce our two featured presenters tonight. Start with my friend Dave Myers. Dave and I are part of the same congregation in Holland Mission, Hope Church, an RCA congregation. Dave is an ordained elder in the RCA. He is a social psychologist at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. And he's a hearing advocate who has represented North Americans with hearing loss on the advisory council at the National Institutes of Health's National Institute on Deafness. And he's authored a book. He's authored many books, but including one titled A Quiet World, Living with Hearing Loss. Ever since I was first introduced to Dave Myers 30-some years ago, I've known him as a champion for the use and installation of hearing technology. And I'm grateful, Dave, for all that you've done to help so many utilize this technology.
Thank you, Terry.
And Juliette Sterkens is a native of the Netherlands, a person of Catholic Dutch descent who comes from a long line of uncle priests and aunt nuns. And I assured her that people of Reformed Dutch heritage, like many of us, will not hold it against her.
All right.
That she was raised in the mother country and hails from the mother church. Juliette has been an audiologist in Wisconsin for nearly 40 years. And in 2012, she began what she calls her encore career as the Hearing Loss Association of America's professional hearing loop advisor, and works to make the world easier to navigate for people with hearing loss. And she's been recognized by several awards, including the American Academy of Audiology Presidential Award. And just want to make clear that Dave and Juliette are simply advocates for optimum technology for people with hearing loss. Neither has any financial interest in any hearing-related project. So with that, Juliette and Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. And we have agreed among the two of us that I'm going to start this off. And I am going to go through a number of slides pretty fast, but the slides are going to be available. I'm also willing to share slides with anyone who emails me. Having said that, let's get started. And my hope is to get all of you in the hearing loop, so to speak. Just to start off with, hearing loss is kind of a misunderstood disability, but in a nutshell, it usually affects clarity first, and then as the hearing loss progresses, it also starts to affect the hearing ability. But the biggest problem that people report is that they have trouble discerning speech out of background noise. And the typical complaint that people with hearing loss will report is that I can hear, but I can't understand. And that's because their hearing loss prevents them from hearing high-pitched consonants, making it very difficult to discern the words. It's like playing Wheel of Fortune, but only getting the vowel sounds. Now, hearing loss is very prevalent. We estimate about 1 out of every 5 teenagers has some type of beginning hearing loss. 1 out of 14 Generation Xers and has some hearing loss, and that number then increases to 1 out of 6 in the baby boomers. And of course, the oldest baby boomers right now are 76, 1 out of 3 for people over the age of 60, 1 out of every 2 over the age of 70. Estimated close to 40 million people of over the age of 12 has hearing loss. That's data from Johns Hopkins. And I also want to draw your attention that less than 3% of all people with hearing loss, PWHL, use American Sign Language. And that's estimated about 500,000 people use American Sign Language in the home in the US and Canada. So hearing aids, we think that hearing aids are the same as eyeglasses, or a lot of people think so, but hearing aids have a lot of limitations. They don't restore hearing to normal. Their effective range is really 2-3 arms lengths at best. Now that varies. Some people can hear a little bit further, but some people can only hear within an arm's length or 2. Hearing aids amplify all background noise. And as soon as there is some reverberation, like what we frequently encounter in places of worship, that problem will also be picked up by the microphones of the hearing aids. And the hearing aids don't correct the auditory speech processing. I may be able to hear great in a hearing loop, but I'm still processing the information through my Dutch brain. And the more severe the hearing loss, the more difficult frequently the auditory processing is. And aging ears, coupled to aging brains, also report that they have more trouble processing sounds. Now, the hearing aid limitations can be overcome with a number of ways. If it's for the hearing aid, they can be overcome with accessories that goes beyond this lecture today. But it can, in public places, the limitations of hearing aids can be overcome by assistive listening systems. And that brings me to the ADA law, the law in America, the Americans with Disabilities Act law that requires, in places where there is audible communication integral to the use of the space and a PA system is in use, an assistive listening system shall be provided. Now, generally, churches are excluded, but in some states, building codes, and I'm thinking of Texas and California, do mandate that the religious facilities provide assistive listening systems. And then, in other words, their laws are stricter or go further than the federal law. So what is assistive technology? Someone compared them to binoculars for hearing aid or cochlear implant users. Envision yourself sitting in a church and trying to reach for the sound of the speaker. Generally, that happens because there are speakers installed in the facility. But remember, the effectiveness of the hearing aid is 3, 6, maybe 10 feet. And any sound that's picked up from further away is going to be mixed with all the background noise in that facility. So in order to get the sound from the speaker to the user with the hearing aid, some type of system, some type of binocular will have to be used. Now, there are 5 different assistive listening systems, and I'm going to try and go over all of them, some a little bit briefly, but just to let you know that there are a number of different systems available. But frequently, the ADA doesn't mandate or doesn't specify that a particular system. It basically says that the system has to provide effective communication for the person who's hard of hearing. And that means that frequently the type of assistive listening system is left to the AV person, who may know nothing about hearing loss or may feel compelled to provide a system that is low cost or that is easy to install. And assistive listening systems come with different signs or signage. This type of signage, when there is no letter T in the bottom of the sign, it means that the user has to go to a service desk or a front desk to pick up a device. If the signage indicates a T, that refers to the telecoil inside the hearing aid. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And that means that a user does not have to pick up a listening device. They can just sit down and activate a telecoil inside their hearing aid. So the first system, the FM system, the system that the AV people are definitely the most familiar with, requires the user to pick up a listening device and, of course, return it following the service. I hear a lot of complaints there that devices are not being returned, sometimes just plain forgetfulness. These devices will not work for somebody who's very hard of hearing. They already have their hearing aids in their ear. To couple that type of FM device to the hearing aid, a neck loop would have to be fitted to the listening device. So if you're watching this and you have an FM system, the system can be made compatible, but it still doesn't make it a very convenient system for hearing aid users to use. The second system is an infrared system, very infrequently used in churches, and that's because it doesn't work in sunlight. And again, this kind of system requires the user to pick up a listening device. And that means that these devices have to be maintained by the facility. The third system, and by far the user preferred system, is the hearing loop system. That sign is indicated by the ear with the slash and the letter T in the right bottom. And a hearing loop sends audio signals via magnetic waves direct to the telecoil inside the hearing aid or the cochlear implant of the user. And it's important to note that as an audiologist, for me, that telecoil is programmed for the user's own hearing loss. So it provides not generic sound, but very optimum sound to that person with the hearing aid. So the hearing loop consists of a wire that is installed in the room. Frequently, it's an array of wire. I'm just making it very simple in this particular drawing. The wire can be installed in the bottom, underneath carpeting, in a basement, against the ceiling, underneath the sanctuary, or above a floor, but it can be tops 11, 12, 13 feet. Otherwise, the signal will not be strong enough where people are seated. Anybody in that looped area, as long as they have a hearing aid or a cochlear implant with a T-coil, or a loop receiver with headphones, something that looks like this, the user can then hear what's being transmitted by the sound. And in effect, what's happening in a hearing loop is that this microphone, the microphone that the presenter is using on the podium, becomes the microphone of the user with the hearing aid. So he or she doesn't have to reach for the sound. The sound, in effect, comes to them as if they are a mere 8 inches away from the mouth of the speaker. It's the purest sound that they can hear. Hearing loops work with all brands of hearing aids and cochlear implants, and hearing aids, of course, come in many sizes and shapes. Frequently, consumers don't know that they have a T-coil in their hearing aid because their provider may not have activated. The good news is that if a telecoil is lacking, it can very often be added after the fact by purchasing a remote accessory. It's not ideal, but at least it gives the user the option to still be able to benefit from the hearing loop signals. And these are examples of remote microphones. This is made by Starkey. There's the letter T, very small. This is a remote control that's being used by people with the cochlear brand, cochlear implant, and resound hearing aids. And this is a new remote by the Widex company. So hearing loops provide dramatic benefit to the users. I have to tell you, it blew my patients away. They simply couldn't believe how well they could hear in the hearing loop and claimed that they could hear better than their wife or their spouse in the service. They could hear jokes, they could hear little asides. It was literally overwhelming. So I did a survey And it ended up being a survey of over 800 people who used hearing aids and cochlear implants. The simple question was, so if you just use your hearing aids on a scale from 1 to 10, how well do you hear? This particular person circled a 2 in the church St. Raphael's, that's in Oshkosh, and out of the loop, and in the loop, he or she, these are anonymous surveys, circled a 9, and the aggregate data is shown in this chart. So I'm going to ask you to listen to a recording. The first recording is out of the loop, like a hearing aid user would hear.
The second lesson, be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord.
And the second recording is in the loop.
The second lesson, be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord.
And if that sounds too good to be true, it is. It's the clearest sound that you can get from a microphone. So back in 2010, I had heard Dave Myers speak in 2008, late 2008, and it just dawned on me that that's what was going to help my patients hear. I undertook advocacy with the help of an engineer husband around Oshkosh. We're about an hour south of Green Bay. And by June 2010, we had about 2,000 hearing loops installed. And today, we are nearing 900 hearing loops in Wisconsin, and almost 500 houses of worship have installed the technology. So there's definitely some variation and some variables when we're talking about loop installations. The biggest ones are how large is your sanctuary? What type of flooring do you have in the sanctuary? Are there carpet tiles? Is there a wood floor? Do you have tile so that the grout is going to have to be removed? And whether there is steel reinforced concrete in the building. And that is important because metal in the building, in the structure, will absorb that magnetic signal and require that more wire gets installed. In effect, the cost of the loop is almost always determined by the amount of effort required to hide the wire. And that's a lot easier if it's a perimeter loop, a loop that circles around the seated area of a church that might be of all wood construction. But there is going to be a lot more wire installation if there is metal in the building, and a number of loops, what is called a phased array loop, has to be installed. If you're interested in learning more about how this gets done, there is a loop installer in Wisconsin who has posted thousands of loops on his website, and the website is listed on the slide right here. So these hearing loops have to meet a standard, and the international standard for hearing loops is 60118-4. And when installers adhere to that standard, it means that these loops work the same the world over. Our daughter lives in Australia. She sends me pictures of hearing loops. Those loops work the same as the loop in our church at St. Raphael's here in Oshkosh. It also means that the loops provide a very clear signal from 100 to 5,000 hertz, that the magnetic field is strong and even, and that they're not installed in places where there is EMI, electromagnetic interference. And by the way, if there is EMI in a building, not installing a loop, but installing an FM system with neck loops would still show up as magnetic, as interference in the telecoil, because it's the telecoil that picks up the electromagnetic interference. So interference should always be researched and tried to be resolved prior to an installation of any assistive listening system. And typically, This is not a do-it-yourself project. The HLAA, the Hearing Loss Association of America, has a number of handouts, and one of them is best practices for hearing loop installation that can all be found on the hearingloss.org website. Now, I'm still talking about the different types of assistive listening systems. Audio over Wi-Fi is a technology that some companies are touting as an option for hearing access, and it is not, for a number of reasons. First of all, it's not directly hearing aid compatible. It nearly always broadcasts the sound to the phone, and then the phone has to broadcast the audio to the hearing aids. In that process, it causes a delay, a significant audio delay, and more than half a second of audio delays have been measured. So the audio experience is terrible. The lip sync is terrible for people who are hard of hearing. And for me, the biggest reason of all is that it's difficult to handle. My mom is 96. She can find a push button on her hearing aid. There's no way she could use an app or a smartphone or somehow download an app and make this work on her phone. And I truly wish that audio companies would stop promoting this technology as an option for hearing access. Now, it can work for audio translation, and it can work in places where audio is muted, like sports bars or fitness centers. And the last but not least, and this is for any audiologists in the meeting, audio over Wi-Fi doesn't permit the user to hear his or her own voice. They will only hear what's coming through the Wi-Fi system. That means that they lose control over their own voice. It's hard for singing. They can't hear what people are saying to their left and right. And by the way, the reviews for these systems, from what I've seen, have not been very good. The fifth system, this is a in the future system, Bluetooth LE audio. And we expect that in the next decade or two, there will be a transition to worldwide use of Bluetooth LE audio in public venues, particularly airports and theaters. And the hope, of course, is that this will also happen in churches. The technology is called Auracast, but there are no public systems or compatible hearing aids that exist as of yet, whereas there are millions of hearing loops and millions of FM and infrared systems with neck loops in use around the world. It's anticipated that there will be a duo ecosystem. Hearing loops will be in use for many years to come. And as Bluetooth LE audio and Auracast systems find deployment, they will be used side by side. And international consumer organizations are on this and are imploring the hearing aid industry to keep in mind that users need to hear today. My mother needs to hear today, not be told that the new system is on the horizon. Just a little bit of tidbit news. We are working, our committee, the Get in the Hearing Loop committee from HLAA is working with Google to put hearing loops on the map, and we are working mostly with loops that have been installed in North America. It's really a little bit involved to try and explain this right now, but if you have control over your Google business account as a church, you are able to update your Google Maps, your Google profile as having what is called an assistive hearing loop. You need to use the Google Maps app and scroll down to the word about under the photo once you type in a particular location. So assistive listening systems require the use of microphones, and better yet, either repeating the questions from the audience or from congregants, or passing a second mic around. If your facility is still using an FM system, ensure that these individual units are in working order, that batteries are charged or being charged, that units are turned off at the end of every service, and that you provide neck loops for hearing aid users. And for all public assistive listening systems, proper signage is needed, and perhaps you can provide a brochure here in our church, and always announce the availability of the hearing loop when a lot of guests are gathered at your facility. So to keep your hearing loop in good working order, it's important that the hearing loop is always powered on, when the AV equipment is powered up. Not that it requires a second turning on, because that's where things, that's when people find out, oh, someone didn't turn the loop on. Checking the hearing loop takes less than a minute with a loop listening device, or any experienced hearing aid user in my community will immediately call me if the loop isn't working. I highly recommend that if you have loops installed in your facility, that you work out an arrangement with your installer to have an annual checkup every year or so. And every time major work on AV equipment is done, I can't tell you how often we were called in after some AV company did work on the AV installation, only to find out that the audio input was plugged out or that the power was turned off. And any kind of work on flooring, recarpeting, retiling, and construction work must come with the caveat that a hearing loop is installed in the facility, and to be extra careful. One of my strengths is that I like helping churches promote their hearing loop installation. And if you're looking at this, we have a loop, but how can we get the word out? I am the person who can help you with that. Information for your websites, educational flyers. These can be used for bulletin inserts. They're 3 to a page, and they have been used all around the country. Also note that, for example, this church in Oshkosh always says on their front page that I have a hearing loop installed, and telling those in the church to switch the hearing aid to telecoil. This little cartoon was designed by a secretary in a Catholic church in Amro or Winneconne. And that's my alarm. I need 2 more minutes, Terry. I hope you'll forgive me that I'm running a little over. A little bit more on signage. There's lots of ways you can provide signage that's very visible. Some come on bulletin boards, outside signage. I love this particular sign. And this church in Menasha put it out on their marquee. If you use an overhead projector, I can help you create a slide that will inform anybody in the church that you offer a hearing loop, and that if there are participants who don't use hearing aids, that you have listening devices available. If you need more help looking for experienced or reliable installers who will travel, fundraising ideas. I've been blogging on Loop Wisconsin. That's my website. You can click on blogs, and I have a blog particularly geared towards churches. And here's my email address. If you need help, feel free to contact me. And then a few more websites for resources. And that's it on my part.
Thank you, Dr. Sterkens. I have to tell you, she is Saint Juliette to many of us in the hearing loss community. She gave up a successful practice, which she owned in Oshkosh, in order to, for a minimal stipend, spend the rest of her life, her professional life, supporting people with hearing loss. So we don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to speak fast and go fast. I'm going to give you a case example of a person with hearing loss who in 1999 got hearing aids that I was told had these little magnetic receptors called telecoils, a little $2 part that adds no noticeable cost to the hearing instrument. I knew that many people with hearing loss have it. In fact, the more severe the hearing loss, the more likely people are to have a hearing instrument with a telecoil, as do 4 and 5 of those in the Hearing Loss Association of America. I'm a new cochlear implant recipient, and as Dr. Sterkens mentioned, cochlear implants come with telecoils, which for me work just fine. They have an application for listening to landline telephones because they send not just sound, but a magnetic signal to the telecoil in the hearing aid. But my first real experience was at the Iona Abbey off the west coast of Scotland. As I sat there listening to a service and as sound reverberated around those ancient stone walls, it reverberated off the wall, and by the time it got to my ear, the sign was indecipherable. And then my wife noticed there was a sign on the wall with that little T in the lower right, indicating there was a hearing loop installed. So she nudged me to activate my hearing aid. And lo and behold, suddenly what I was experiencing was rather like what this woman is experiencing with her first experience of a hearing loop.
My God. That is a nice and the telephone and so this is be clear. Beautiful. So he's asking later on. Made me cry.
So as I travel around the UK, I learned it's not just the Iona Abbey, but basically all worship places with PA systems have this. So it's in Westminster Abbey, it's at Canterbury Cathedral and all the other major cathedrals. It's at various transit venues, such as the ticket window for the Tower of London, at loops, which is like Walgreens pharmacies, at ticket windows for train stations, in airports, in more than 12,000 post offices here in St. Andrews, for example. The woman behind the glass would not be audible to me were it not for her ability to broadcast directly to my hearing aids. And in an age of COVID, of course, we now have many more glass barriers here in the United States as well. It's in London taxis, where a red light coming on indicates that you can talk to the driver and the driver can talk to you through your hearing aids with a loop taxi. It's on London buses. And here in the United States, of course, we have historically gone with FM or infrared systems, as Dr. Sterkens was explaining, which are hearing aid incompatible, cause one to take out one's hearing aid in order to receive inferior generic sound. And because they're inconveniently located, they rarely get used. So at the Muskegon Civic Auditorium, for example, the first use of the assistive listening system, an FM system, as I recall, came 1 year after installation when the person that requested it came back and asked for it. I asked at our local seven-screen theater complex how often their assisted listening systems get used, and I was told it's about once per month per theater. They've got dozens of these things stocked, and they're just sitting on the shelves, the batteries growing old. And what we need is not generic sound. Most people need sound programmed by their hearing instrument for their peculiar hearing loss, which can differ. It can be a low frequency loss or a high frequency loss. Also, it's so important, if you want hearing technology that people will use, to make it easy, to consider the human factor. If all a person has to do when they're having trouble hearing is touch a button and their hearing aids become in-the-ear speakers, they will do it. If they have to get up out of their seat, make a fuss, locate, wear conspicuous equipment that's hearing aid incompatible and return it. That's the traditional American assistive listening system. People, by and large, will not use it. Hearing loops cost more, but they are so much more preferred by users that in the long run, they cost less per user because they have so many more people who will use them. I just want to show again this slide that Dr. Sterkens showed, showing the user response. Among those of nearly 900 people who had experienced a hearing loop system, the average listening experience was in the mid-range without a hearing loop, and was dramatically better. You don't need a statistical analysis. People love this system that have experienced it. The Sarasota hearing loss members were asked how they like their hearing loop system, and there you go. Nothing happens but a dream. So I had this dream. I came back from the UK and I thought, geez, why can't we in the United States and in Canada have this technology as well, apart from a few spotty installations here and there? So I created a website, hearingloop.org, which is hosted by Hope College until recently. And I aimed to see if we could make a loop, if we could loop a community, Holland, Zeeland, Michigan, and maybe, if it succeeded, encourage other communities to do the same. Fast forward to today, essentially every worship place of any magnitude with a PA system in Holland and Zeeland has this technology. Moreover, it's now spread across Reformed and Christian Reformed churches. We know of more than 200, and a listing of all of these will be available to you after the presentation today. It's in a number of airports now, including both concourses and all gate areas of Grand Rapids Airport. The largest installation is the 12,200 fixed seats of Michigan State's basketball arena. So we have this national Get in the Hearing Loop initiative, which is consumer-led by people with hearing loss that are asking for it. The disability motto, of course, is nothing about us without us. Well, if you want to know what we want, this is it. And there are loop initiatives all over the country where there are people with hearing loss that are advocating for this hearing aid compatible assistive listening. And lo and behold, it's come to New York City subway booths, to New York City taxis. And New York City, in fact, is going to be, has passed legislation requiring hearing loop technology in public assembly areas that are being newly constructed or renovated. And it's coming to all New York City airports under the New Jersey Port Authority. It's in the houses of Congress. It's in the United States Supreme Court chambers now. And there's progress, thanks to the U.S. Access Board, towards mandating hearing aid compatible technology, which means hearing loops for now, on future U.S. rail and subway cars. And as a result of our initiative, we're reaching out to people through the hearing industry periodicals, through newspapers such as the Chicago Tribune, AARP, Science Friday, Wall Street Journal, New York Times made this a front page story some years ago that gave a big boost to our efforts. And in fact, that became the second most emailed article of the prior month in the New York Times. There was so much interest in this. So we say, let's loop America. I mean, why not? Why not bring this to all our worship places? And the good thing, the really exciting thing is that so often I know we lament that the church trails the culture. This is a case where by helping its people hear the word, the church in America is actually leading the culture toward accessibility. Well, if that doesn't work for you, if it's too costly, there is a low-cost alternative that my wife found in a country store catalog. It's called the Hearing Helpers, $9.95. I actually bought these and it doesn't work very well, I hate to tell you. And my website, if you want to contact me, is just my name.org. Again, hearingloop.org, and Hearing Loop resources after tinyurl.com will take you to the HLAA resources. So I'll stop there with that 10 minutes of sort of a case example, and Terry will welcome some questions.
Wow. Thank you, Dave. Juliette, that's you've walked us through a lot of material there. Wonderful. And we have some time for questions. So if you have a question you'd like for us to pose to either Juliette or Dave, please enter those in the Q&A. I did get one via chat, I think that came just to me, but Lindsay and I, my colleague, Disability Concerns colleague from the Christian Reformed Church in North America, Lindsay Whelan-Capel, and I are going to field these questions. So, Lindsay, is there anything you want to add before we get started, or do you have a question ready to ask?
Yes. Hello, this is Lindsay speaking. If using the Q&A and typing is difficult for you, then you can use the raise hand feature, or even just raise your hand and we will hope to catch you and see you. We do have several screens of people, so the raise hand feature is a little easier for us to identify you, but then we will call on you at some point and you can ask your question. But for everyone that can use the Q&A, that is preferred if you're able to. So I will start us off with a question. Someone is wondering, can FM hearing devices be used in the same church where there is a hearing loop? We have folks who often forget to wear their hearing aids to church.
Sure. Juliette's going to be the answer for most of these questions because she's the professional audiologist. But absolutely, an FM system and a loop system can be simultaneous in the same place.
It wouldn't have to, Dave, if the church would have loop listening devices. They look essentially the same as FM devices, but they will pick up the loop signal. They can just hand those out at the beginning of the service, and again would have to be picked up after the service. So with FM system or loop listening devices, yes, both can be used side by side.
Thank you for making that point, because the point is made that a hearing loop can serve everybody and anybody, whether they have hearing aids or not.
Yeah.
And exactly the way an FM system does.
Yeah. And the other good thing is there are some listening devices for people for whom the cost of hearing aids is a big issue. And I imagine that everybody knows somebody in a church who can't afford the hearing aids. They are called pocket talkers or pocket amplifiers. They can be used at home in a quiet environment with earphones. They can be brought to church, and then the telecoil in the device can be turned on. And so they serve two purposes and can be a really good solution for people who would like to communicate better, for example, with parents who are very hard of hearing and also want to hear in church. And for those of you who are very Dutch, and with that, I mean very frugal, I have found some of those devices available on eBay for very economical. So if you want more information, contact me.
Thank you. Here's one that I'm putting in the chat. You could copy and paste it. So in case that helps Juliette or Dave, one of the questions I have is in regard to signage. The T indicator on the signage illustrates a telecoil. My church offers personal neck loops that work with our FM receivers. Is there a symbol that is used for that, or for that? Is it commonly understood for that offering?
No, I think it would be good to have information. Again, develop some type of bulletin insert or a little brochure, how to hear in our church. Make it very clear that an FM system has to be picked up and that they can come with neck loops, and then also give instruction how to use the neck loop. The neck loop cannot be tight around the neck. It has to be draped kind of wide or underneath the lapels for better magnetic field pickup by the hearing aids, because in effect, that neck loop is creating a loop around the head.
I noticed that the next question is if it's possible to get copies of the presentations. Juliette has already indicated yes, and I'll be happy to give you mine, Terry, to distribute as you wish.
Great, thank you. Lindsay, is it my turn or do you have one?
I'll take the next one.
All right.
We're getting a lot of wonderful questions, so thank you for sending those. Wondering if so sanctuaries is what we've kind of primarily talked about, but what are the other spaces that are important to consider in a church where a loop could be really important?
Maybe I could answer this for my Reformed church, which Terry knows well, Hope Church. We have it in both a chapel separate from the sanctuary, and we have it in the commons area where all church gatherings and adult education happen. And Hope Church's people are well socialized to always speak into a microphone. So for every adult ed class, we have 2 roving mics to carry to people. And so that would be the other venue that I would say would be really important.
I agree.
Okay, here's one. Must the loop always be in the ground?
No, it does not. Like I mentioned in the presentation, I live in Wisconsin. There's a lot of Lutheran churches here, and frequently they're built on a basement. And if there is access in the basement to the ceiling, then the wire can be installed in the ceiling against the ceiling, and the signal will radiate into the sanctuary, but will also work in the lower area, but not at the same time. So you could have bingo in the basement on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and you could use the loop in the church upstairs. I see another question about our church sanctuary sits on a concrete slab, and that's where installation becomes a little trickier. If the flooring in the church is carpet tile, literally the carpet tile can be pulled up, and I know of loops that were installed within a half a day. They use flat copper wire underneath the carpet tile. I know of loop installers who come with a carpet man. They literally very carefully cut the carpet, install the wire, and then push it back down or re-glue the carpet. It can be done nearly invisible. I've seen a lot of installations where the wire is installed under the trim around the seated area. So there's carpeting in the aisles, there is tile underneath the pews, and then the wire is installed in that trim that overlaps the carpet and the tile. And again, I refer to the drssound.com website, where he has posted thousands of photographs to show you how this is done. If it's a tile floor, the grout can be removed. The wire can be embedded in between the tile, and then the tile can be grouted, so to speak. I've also seen the tile cut. It's definitely a very dusty job, but it can be done once the wire is in. It's never going to be cut or damaged. So that's another solution. If the church is less than 30 feet wide, and I'm no installer, the wire can also be installed in a trim or against the ceiling. I've seen it installed around the ceiling with copper foil that actually looks very attractive. And again, I can provide photos for anyone who's interested, but that's where you really need a trained loop installer to come to the church, to do the measurement, and to kind of see what's feasible, what can and cannot be done.
Right.
One thing yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I wanted to be brief because we got a lot more questions here. But at the Grand Rapids Airport, it's in the ceiling. There's rebar in the concrete that sucks some magnetic energy. You can overpower that with more power, smaller loops. But do you want to go to the next question, Terry?
I'll let Lindsay ask it.
Yeah, I'll hop in. This is Lindsay. We need to start heading towards wrap up, but the question we're getting a lot of is wanting to have a sense of a ballpark of the cost of installing a loop. Small, medium, large church, that kind of a thing. What's a ballpark? What should people be thinking?
And I asked I asked a Midwest installer. Ballpark number is somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. It varies. My experience, and like I said, I have fostered hundreds of loops in Wisconsin. It frequently is not a cost issue. It's a not knowing who it benefits issue. People step forward to make this happen. What's your experience, Dave?
First of all, I'm asked that question a lot. And I also get, partly because we have a family foundation, I asked a lot of the question, can you apply for funding from the outside for our loop? Or they go to people with hearing loss and ask them to fund it. And I say, in this day and age, accessibility is the responsibility of an institution. You don't go to people in wheelchairs and say, if you want a ramp or an elevator, that's costly. You got to raise funds to have it. It's just enabling people to hear the word is like what churches do. And so that's just built into your budget in when renovating facilities or when making facilities accessible.
Can I put one more question in the chat a minute, Lindsay? Someone asked, we have an old loop system that doesn't work at this time. Who are the people we should contact to update the system? Which is a larger question of how do I find installers in my area?
And I'm looking at Dave.
Okay. Well, hearingloop.org does have a list of trained and qualified installers who are pledged to meet the international standard. There are lots of AV people who will gladly do this for you. When contracting for that, you want to be sure you get a guarantee that it will meet the international standard for strength and evenness of coverage, because there's people who will do it cheap for shoddy work. And Juliette, do you want to add? I mean, there are the companies that provide the equipment also have installers, and I have a link to those companies like Contacta, for example, or Amplitronic.
And Williams Sound.
And yep. Williams Sound. And they will guide you to people in their area. So those links are all at hearingloop.org.
Great. I am pleasantly surprised by the number of questions we have, and I regret that we don't have time to address them all. I'm just curious, St. Juliette, as Dave referred to you, is there a cost to reach out to you and ask for your assistance in either advocating for a loop or helping to educate the congregation about a loop?
No, I gladly help. And I think I made it clear at the beginning of my slides, I get grant funding from David Myers Foundation to advocate. But I mean, truly, it's wonderful to be able to help people here. And I saw one of the questions here was, audiologists are not fitting hearing aids with telecoils. We're seeing an uptick there, and that's partially because of the technology in the hearing aids, partially because we have accessories that give access to telecoils, but also partially because of our push in the community or in the audiology community. I have, for the last 10 years, worked very, very hard to educate audiologists and hearing care professionals. And definitely among some of them, there is an unfounded belief that somehow telecoils and hearing loops are old technology and don't sound good. And they've never been in the loop. They've never experienced the loop. They've never dealt with a client who came back telling them they could hear the minister lick his lips. And yet they tell their patients, you don't need a loop. They are wrong. And there's plenty of data and plenty of articles to disprove that. And I am willing to reach out to any audiologists of people who are here or to work in communities. I have actually traveled to communities to educate and work with the audiologists. And frequently that changes things.
I would just add that Doug DeBoer is very perceptive in noting there is a catch-22 situation. Why would audiologists want to give people telecoils if there aren't hearing loops? Why would you want to install a hearing loop if you don't have people with telecoils? All I can say is if you build it, they will come. What we did in Holland is install the loops, and the audiologists equip people with telecoils, and people get new hearing aids every 5 years or so. So if your worship place builds this into its accessibility, your people will eventually and over time have the hearing instruments that use it directly. And if they don't, they can still, like, it's just as if it were an FM or infrared system, check out a receiver box and headset, although that's less satisfactory, and very few of those get used.
Yeah, I really think that the church has to promote this, has to announce it, has to make people aware that this is available, and people forget. If you don't publish it in your bulletin, if you don't occasionally hand on or hold up one of these devices, if you don't put it on your slides, a little education goes a long way. And I have handouts. If there's anybody here who wears hearing aids, who wants to educate their audiologist, contact me. I'll be happy to provide you with the handout. You should never, ever go to see your audiologist without information in your hand and say, I need you to read this. You may be the one who's educating that audiologist, and you may be the one who's making that audiologist change their ways.
Julie, one other quick question, Juliette, one other quick question I saw. Is there a problem with wiring close to an organ or other electronic instrument? Sometimes there are interference issues, but they're virtually always solvable, aren't there?
Yep.
Okay. I would love to ask more questions, but I don't want to infringe on your time, and I'll turn it over to Lindsay to sort of wrap us up here.
Yes, it feels like we could go on for a long while yet. There's a lot of engagement, which I'm thrilled about. And this is recorded, and so we hope that you will tell others who maybe couldn't join us tonight about this, that you'll share this with folks in your church who do tech things, and others who might be able to use the coils or the loop in the church and the T-coil system. And so we hope that you'll share what you've learned with others in your church. Maybe you can think of a couple people right now that you want to talk about this with. We in the chat will be a couple of links to some additional resources within our disability concerns and what we do. But I just want to highlight two things. One is, if you're not currently receiving our newsletter, we would like for you to sign up so that you can hear about future events like this one. So that you can do at crcna.org/disability or rca.org/disability. And second, I want to mention that we are still taking signups for our My Body Is Not a Prayer Request book clubs. So we have a partnership with Calvin Institute for Christian Worship, who will pay for up to 10 books for a church that has a book club. So if your church has not signed up to do a book club, we encourage you to think about that and think about leading that or talking to someone else who might lead that if that's not in your wheelhouse. But we would love for people to read Amy Kenny's book and engage with the questions and so forth. So those are just a couple of ways to continue learning and growing. Thank you so much for joining us and spending your time with us this evening. And thank you, especially David and Juliette, for the really helpful information that you shared. We're really grateful for you and your expertise.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yep.
Yes.
Well done, both of you. Thank you.